This definitely has to be one of the craziest mini gaming PCs we've ever put together over here on the channel, and when it comes down to it, this will basically play anything at 1080p. We've got a dedicated NVIDIA GPU, 6-core, 12-thread CPU, and overall, it was pretty simple to put together using off-the-shelf parts, because the main component we're using here is the Lenovo ThinkCentre M920. This is the small form factor version. I opted to get one with the Core i7-8700T, and there's several different ways that you can put something like this together. I personally got the idea from another YouTuber who goes by the name ITG Gear. They also 3D printed a whole cover for theirs. I will leave a link to their channel down below because there's a lot of great information over there. But yeah, what we're going to be doing here is actually installing an NVIDIA RTX dual slot low profile in this small form factor Lenovo ThinkCentre. I've got a lot to go over here, and before we get into it, I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by Vip-Urcdkey. I've been using this site for quite some time now. They offer Steam keys, Uplay, Ubisoft, but the main thing I pick up over here are Windows 11 Pro keys. And right now, if you use code ETA, you can get 25% off. So at checkout, we'll just enter the code ETA. That's going to bring the price on down to $21.86 for a full Windows 11 Pro key. They're going to email you that key, and then you can activate Windows. Speaking of that, let's head over to a new PC that I recently built. As you can see, we're running Windows 11, and from Settings, we're going to go to Activation Settings. It's going to tell us that we're not active. We don't have a key installed, so we're just going to paste it right in here. Choose Next. It's going to activate Windows for us, and we're ready to go. If you're in need of cheap Windows keys, I'll leave a link in the description, and remember, you can use code ETA for 25% off. Okay, so getting right down to it, what we've got here is the small form factor Lenovo ThinkCentre M920Q. After pulling the top off, there's not much room to work in here. We've got our CPU and our cooler over on the left-hand side. Over on the right-hand side, a little bit of open space. In fact, I did remove a 2.5-inch drive that came pre-installed here. But the reason we're going to be using the 920Q is because it does have a PCIe slot. In fact, it's a PCIe X8 3.0. Proprietary right now, but luckily they do sell an adapter. And this will bring it up to a full-size PCIe slot. Now, obviously, it's still going to be running at X8 3.0, but when it comes to a lot of these mini PCs that have any kind of PCIe access, it's usually running at X4 3.0 or even lower than that. So I was pretty surprised to see that this is an X8 slot in this thing. Initially, I was going to go with the Radeon RX 6400 single slot low profile card. It actually does fit in here, but I wanted something with a bit more power, and really to get up there, we got to go to a low profile dual slot. So we'll need to remove a few of these brackets that come pre-installed on this thing. And obviously with the dual slot card installed in the small form factor PC, we're not going to be able to put the stock top cover back on it. So if you do have a 3D printer and you want to do something like this, check out ITG Gear's channel for sure. So now we can clear the rear I/O on that card, but with the card that I have, I actually do have to remove a few things up front here. I'm using the Gigabyte low profile RTX 3050. If you opted for the MSI version, it is a bit shorter, but the one I have here does have a longer shroud on it. So I do need to remove all of this up front. Super easy. I think there's just 2 screws here, not an issue. Now that I've got all that out of the way, I can go ahead and install the GPU. I have removed the rear bracket on mine. Since I'm not working with the top cover or anything like that, I really didn't need it here. But we'll go ahead and slot this down. And the way it is right now, we can actually start gaming on this machine, but these Lenovo's only come with a 65-watt power supply. So I've got a 230 watt here from an older Lenovo laptop that I'm going to be using. That way we can send enough power, and I'd say the 160 version would be more than enough, even with the i7 and that 3050 in this thing. And I'm sure at the beginning of the video, you saw that I had a little screen on this. This is actually a stat screen that you can pick up from Amazon. I did a video on these about 2 years ago. They do come in handy. They make a 3.5-inch version, but I've got the 5-inch here. It runs over USB, and we can basically put it anywhere. It's going to pull information from the PC to let us know what's going on. It's totally not necessary, but I do think it looks pretty cool because I've got this open air setup already. And you can totally customize the theme, so you could definitely make it your own, or you could download pre-made themes. I'm going to be using a few pre-made, and I'll show them off in just a bit. But there's one last thing that I want to do here. I picked this up used on eBay, and it did come with 16 gigabytes of RAM, but it's single channel, so we've got one 16 gig stick here. It didn't come with the SSD. That's one that I installed, just a 2 terabyte, test everything out, make sure it worked. but I did have an extra 8 gig stick laying around. It's 2,666 megahertz. So now we're up to 24 gigs of RAM and a 2 terabyte SSD. And after I get that screen mounted, looks a little something like this. So yeah, it's definitely not going to be for everybody. I've got this sitting up vertically, but you could set it horizontally if you want to. It does have feet on the bottom of the unit. And I wanted to show you a couple of these themes. They're just pre-made themes that were built in, but you can totally customize your own. You can swap between them on the fly, and you can set this up horizontally or vertically. It's really up to you. It also supports videos, and it actually just pulled all of my information. So we've got that i7-8700T along with that RTX 3050. Just moving in a bit closer so we can get a better look at everything. We've got that i7-8700T. This will do up to 4 gigahertz, and we've got 6 cores, 12 threads with this unit. I've installed 24 gigabytes of DDR4. It's running at 2666. Just a dual DIMM, already had 16 gigs installed, had an 8 gig stick, figured I'd go ahead and use it. And of course, instead of using the Intel UHD graphics, we've got that low profile GeForce RTX 3050. So there are a few things you need to do with this unit if you're going to build something like this, because when we have the GPU installed, once we put a load on that GPU, it actually limits that CPU by quite a bit. It'll go down to around 10 watts and you're not going to see great performance. In order to keep this up, I'm using throttle stop, and I've been using throttle stop for years. From the TPL, I've set it to 45 watt TDP, and just a heads up, your sustained TDP is going to be about 35 watts. But even after I upped the TDP using throttle stop here, it was still giving me the same issue until I disabled the BD Proc Hot or Pro C Hot. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. And again, I do want to give a big shout out to ITG Gear, because I would never have disabled this trying to get it to work. I probably would have gave up on this unit. So this is what needs to be disabled. And you really don't even have to change the TDP from here. I just wanted to set a 45 watt base. That way I could keep temps on that CPU down, because after all, I mean, very small form factor with a very small CPU cooler. But yeah, everything's working great with this disabled. And I'm actually surprised at what kind of performance we're seeing here. This is pretty awesome. Of course, not a lot of people are going to run out and build something like this, but the last thing I wanted to show you here is with that PCIe slot adapter and this RTX 3050, I figured this was going to be running at an X4 3.0 speed, but it is an X8 slot in this mini PC. So we've got everything put together, got Windows installed. Now it's time to see how this thing can game. And the first one on the list is Red Dead Redemption 2. I've got Afterburner running in the top left-hand corner. You can see that our CPU power is right there up to 35 watts. Now, if we weren't boosting on all of those cores, this will do up to 45 with the TDP set inside of throttle stop. And when it comes to that low profile RTX 3050, it is kind of a cut down version from the real desktop version. Performance is coming just a bit ahead of the laptop variant of the 3050. Oh, next up, we've got Overwatch 2, 1080p, high settings. We don't need any kind of scaling here. This is just a very well optimized game, and this 3050 along with that i7 can handle it just fine. Even with that i7 only boosting up to 35 watts. So this one was pretty impressive, but since its release on PC, I've actually had good performance on low-end iGPUs, so I suspected that this dedicated 3050 would handle it just fine. 1080p high with DLSS set to balanced, we're seeing an average of 78 FPS. And CPU temps here aren't that bad given the super small form factor heatsink that's on the unit. It's open air, I mean we're not blocking any of that air off. Maximum that I saw out of this was 75 degrees Celsius so far. Here's Forza Horizon 5 at 1080p high settings with no DLSS. We got an average of 108 FPS, and I've actually tested this at 1440p with this same card using a different CPU. At high settings, we can get an average of 68, but with some DLSS set to balance, we can get an average of around 85 FPS. And the final game we have here is Cyberpunk 2077 1080p high with DLSS set to balanced. Unfortunately, with these 3000 series NVIDIA cards, frame gen really isn't a thing in games. We just can't access it. If we were using something like a 4060, we could definitely get it going, and it would help out with a lower end card like this. And I'm talking about NVIDIA's frame generation, but there are other technologies. With the recent update, the Cyberpunk 2077, they added FSR 3 and AMD's frame generation. So with that enabled, high settings with no scaling, so we're at a native 1080p, we can get over 100 FPS with this game. In the end, this actually performs pretty well with that RTX 3050, and I know we could get more out of it if we could get that TDP to kind of stay up a bit, but we are working with a very small cooler here, so that CPU would hit thermal throttle pretty quickly at a 65 watt TDP. But for what we have here, I think performance is pretty good. And, even with that side panel removed, adding that screen, I think it looks pretty cool sitting next to the monitor. I know not everybody's going to like the look of this. But I've always kind of been into those open air cases. So I figured with something small form factor, keeping it cheap enough, not having to worry about 3D printing anything, this can definitely get you by at 1080p. But if you want to do something that's totally enclosed, you can always 3D print a cover or get one printed for you. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. If this is something you think you might want to put together, I'll leave links in the description. Not sure how many people are going to do it. And again, if you're into these weird combos, definitely check out ITG Gear's YouTube channel. Link is down in the description. I was going through a bunch of the videos. Really awesome stuff over there. If you've got any questions or you want to see anything else running on this machine, or maybe even this machine with that low profile Radeon RX 6400, let me know in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.